You will hear about the African Union. Yes, it exists. But what is the effect of the African Union in reality? We cannot talk about integration in the theme and not talk about the African Union. Because it is this organization that should unite us, create real integration. But we regret to see these wars that persist on the African continent.
The African Union has become irrelevant. Not a whisper, not a leak, those were the exact words spoken on camera by Burkina Faso's President Ibrahim Traoré. The clip lit up the internet like wildfire. Shockwaves followed. Africa is watching, stunned. What could have driven one of the continent's youngest and most defiant leaders to speak with such brutal clarity? Let's dive in. It started as a routine media briefing, suits, reporters, security at attention. But within minutes, it turned into one of the most raw and unforgettable political moments Africa has seen in years. The video now circulating online shows Traoré standing at a podium, eyes sharp, surrounded by senior officials. But what came next wasn't part of any script. He didn't dodge, flatter, or soften his tone. Instead, he shattered the silence many had grown used to. In a continent where presidents often tiptoe around continental institutions, Traoré went straight for the jugular. He called out the African Union in language that left no room for interpretation. What is the African Union doing for us? Where are they? When our people are being slaughtered? When our villages are falling? When our sovereignty is threatened? What is this union doing? Nothing. The weight of that single word was unbearable. The room fell into silence. Some advisors looked down, others froze in place, but Traoré wasn't done. He continued, now leaning forward, his tone turning deeply personal. We are alone. For a continent where most leaders remain cautious and diplomatic, especially when it comes to continental institutions, Traoré's message landed like a political earthquake. Yet what makes this outburst different from any ordinary political disagreement is not just the boldness, it's the timing. Burkina Faso is currently one of the most embattled nations in Africa. For years, the country has faced waves of brutal insurgency, displacement, economic sabotage, and media smears. Since Traoré took power in 2022 through a military transition, his administration has rapidly removed French troops, launched massive reforms, and attempted to rebuild national security with limited resources. And throughout this turmoil, the African Union has remained almost absent, issuing generic statements, but offering no material support, no strategic deployment, and certainly no political protection. So when Traoré stood up and snapped, he wasn't merely venting. He was calling out what many already felt. Africa's most powerful institution had become a bystander. And this isn't just a political dispute. It's a spiritual one. The African Union was founded to protect sovereignty, unity, and dignity. But if one of the continent's most determined young leaders facing death threats, sanctions, and chaos feels completely abandoned by that very union, then what does that say about the structure itself? Many are now asking if Traoré is right and the AU truly is useless, then what happens next? Who defends the continent? Who leads the charge when African nations resist foreign pressure? The emotional weight of that speech is now ricocheting far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. But before we look at the deeper cracks exposed by his words, we must first understand what the African Union was built to do and why its silence in recent years has become impossible to ignore. To understand why Ibrahim Traoré's emotional speech struck a chord so deeply, we must look beyond the words and into the void left by the African Union AU. His outburst didn't just expose a broken relationship. It revealed an open wound that has been quietly festering across the continent for years. The African Union, headquartered in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, was launched in 2002 to replace the Organization of African Unity, OAU. Its mission was clear: to promote peace, security, unity, and African-led development. It was supposed to be Africa's shield, a united front against neo-colonial interference, civil wars, exploitation, and political instability. But in the 20-plus years since its founding, that mission has turned into a slogan. Traoré's frustration is merely the latest symptom of a deeper crisis. The AU has consistently failed to act when Africa needed it most. Consider the facts. When Libya fell into chaos in 2011, it wasn't the AU that led negotiations or stopped the NATO bombardment. The decision-making was outsourced to Western powers, and Africa's premier institutions stood helpless. When Sudan slid into civil war in 2023, the AU's mediation attempts were weak, delayed, and largely ignored. When the Democratic Republic of Congo faced violent rebellions and the illegal extraction of its minerals by foreign-backed militias, the AU did little more than call for calm. In crisis after crisis, the AU has watched from the sidelines, issuing neatly worded communiques while entire populations bled, starved, or fled. For those on the ground, these statements don't save lives, they mock them. This inaction becomes even more glaring when compared to how quickly the AU moves when it wants to punish internal dissent. In the wake of military takeovers in Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, and Niger, the AU swiftly suspended those countries, labeling their governments as illegitimate without providing real support to address the insecurity and dysfunction that led to the coups in the first place. This double standard hasn't gone unnoticed. How can an institution claim to represent African unity while ignoring suffering but responding with urgency only when Western donors or norms are challenged? That's what Traoré was confronting. A union that defends procedure but not people. Another reason for this perceived betrayal is funding. Over 60% of the AU's budget comes from external partners, primarily the European Union, the United States, and various UN bodies. While foreign aid is not inherently bad, it comes with expectations and red lines. The result: the AU can't fully speak or act independently. It walks on eggshells when criticizing France's monetary grip on West Africa or the US military presence in the Sahel, but leaps into action when African governments refuse to toe the line. This funding imbalance has created an invisible leash. The AU may wear African colors, but many believe it answers to voices far outside the continent. And in that context, Traoré's words feel less like rebellion and more like truth. But it's not just the funding, it's the disconnect. The AU's meetings are filled with aging bureaucrats, carefully worded agendas, and protocol-driven debates. Meanwhile, on the ground, Africans are facing 21st-century warfare, digital propaganda campaigns, economic sabotage, and mass migration. The speed and scale of modern African problems require bold, unconventional, and rapid responses. Traoré isn't demanding perfection. He's demanding presence, leadership, courage. The tragedy is that the AU was once envisioned as that very force, a Pan-African power center capable of responding to crisis without waiting for Washington or Brussels. Instead, it has become a spectator, a stage for politeness in a continent screaming for action. And the anger that Traoré voiced, it's not isolated. It's being echoed in marketplaces in Bamako, classrooms in Niamey, and refugee camps near Ouagadougou. The AU's silence has created a void. And now new leaders, new alliances, and new institutions are beginning to fill it. While the African Union sits paralyzed by its red tape, a new force has emerged from the heart of the Sahel. It's young. It's militant. And it's rewriting the rules of African leadership in real time. Traoré's emotional takedown of the AU wasn't just a moment of despair. It was a line drawn in the sand. A declaration that a new Africa is rising and it no longer seeks permission. At the center of this emerging revolution is the Alliance of Sahel States, EAS, a bloc formed by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Three nations that have openly rejected both ECOWAS and AU authority. These countries, all led by military-backed transitional governments, have done the unthinkable. They've severed ties with France, expelled foreign troops, suspended colonial-era monetary systems, and started building new forms of sovereignty rooted in local control and popular support. What makes these governments different is not just how they came to power, but what they're trying to achieve. Unlike previous military regimes in African history, these leaders are not merely clinging to power or enriching themselves. They're pursuing ideological liberation, pushing for total autonomy over defense, economy, agriculture, and diplomacy. They're renationalizing their resources. They're investing in domestic food production. They're calling for a Pan-Africanism that isn't just symbolic, but material. And here lies the clash. Because the AU, shaped by post-independence elites and heavily influenced by donor expectations, is still playing by rules written in the 20th century. It values constitutional order and democratic transitions even when those systems are visibly manipulated or corrupted by outside forces. The new revolutionary leaders, on the other hand, are saying Africa doesn't need another election, it needs self-defense. It needs dignity. It needs survival. In this new paradigm, legitimacy comes not from foreign observers but from the people. It's no coincidence that Traoré, despite media blackouts and Western suspicion, enjoys massive grassroots support inside Burkina Faso. His rallies draw thousands. His image is painted on street murals. He speaks not in legal jargon, but in language that resonates with young Africans who've never seen a government protect them. This isn't just politics. It's a generational shift. The new African revolution is being led by leaders in their 30s and 40s, rising in regions that were previously silenced or dismissed. They're fluent in social media, direct in speech, and unapologetically confrontational when it comes to foreign dominance. They're not afraid to talk about uranium theft, economic blackmail, or the silent militarization of African airspace. And most importantly, they're not waiting for permission from the AU. This rift is now turning into a continental identity crisis. The AU sees itself as a stabilizing force maintaining order and decorum. But what happens when that order has failed? When does the so-called stability benefit a few at the expense of the majority? When are the only ones truly fighting for Africa being cast as pariahs? What Traoré exposed with his frustration is that the old guard institutions are not equipped to manage the new African reality. They are bound by protocols that no longer reflect the urgency of the times. They are loyal to global structures that no longer respect African sovereignty. And they are led by officials who speak of peace but do not know the sound of drones overhead or the smell of burnt-out villages. As the EES carves its path, forming security coalitions, developing local industries, and openly engaging with powers like Russia, Turkey, and China, it's sending a message to the rest of the continent. We're done waiting for the AU to lead. We'll do it ourselves. But will this new model succeed? Can military-led transitions truly deliver long-term governance and justice? Or will the revolutionary wave crash against the same rocks of corruption and stagnation that sank its predecessors? The battle lines are drawn, but the outcome remains unwritten. As Traoré's sharp words ripple across the continent, and new revolutionary alliances gain momentum, one thing becomes painfully clear. Africa is wounded, and it's bleeding alone. The tragedy isn't just the dysfunction of institutions like the African Union. It's that this dysfunction has real, horrifying consequences for people on the ground. While bureaucrats debate constitutionalism in air-conditioned conference halls, families in the Sahel are burying their dead, running from insurgent attacks, or watching their farmlands dry up from neglect and insecurity. This isn't theoretical, it's existential. In Burkina Faso, entire provinces have become ungovernable due to the relentless onslaught of insurgent factions. Villages are torched overnight. Teachers flee their posts. Markets collapse. And through it all, the African Union, despite having a Peace and Security Council, has sent no serious peacekeeping force, no emergency aid, no rapid response. It speaks of sovereignty but offers no shield. In Sudan, one of the worst humanitarian catastrophes of this decade is unfolding. As rival military factions tear the country apart, tens of thousands have been killed and millions displaced. Entire neighborhoods in Khartoum are reduced to rubble. The health care system has collapsed. And the EU? It organized a summit. But on the ground, no protection came. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, armed militias, some with suspected foreign backing, continue to ravage eastern provinces. Mass rapes, child soldiers, mining theft on an industrial scale. The world's hunger for coltan, cobalt, and gold has turned Congo into a battlefield of exploitation. Yet, the AU hasn't even been able to coordinate a unified regional force to reclaim the region. The silence is criminal. In Mozambique, Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Cameroon, Different shades of violence persist, including ethnic clashes, separatist wars, and insurgencies, all met with local exhaustion and continental inaction. The pattern is unmistakable. When African countries cry out for help, not with words but with blood, the African Union responds with one of three things: a press statement, a committee, or nothing at all. This is the true context of Traoré's emotion, because while he leads Burkina Faso through one of its darkest chapters, he sees no cavalry coming. He sees fellow African governments under siege just like his. And he sees the very organization designed to unify and defend them choosing irrelevance. And the abandonment doesn't stop with military crises. Africa is being left to suffer economic wounds as well. Inflation is rising. Global lenders demand austerity. Western companies extract raw materials while leaving behind poverty and pollution. As African leaders push for currency reform, debt relief, and industrialization, the AU offers no concrete strategy, only wishful declarations and endless summits. Then there's the climate disaster: droughts in the Sahel, cyclones in southern Africa, rising sea levels threatening West African coastlines. But where is the African Union's coordinated climate action? Where is its emergency task force? Its infrastructure for relief? Its mobilization of continental resources? Missing. The betrayal then is not just political, it's personal. To the millions who live with insecurity and hunger, the AU's failure is felt in every empty school, every shut-down hospital, every checkpoint manned by rebels instead of police. It is not an abstract problem. It's a daily scar. And now, with new leaders stepping up to protect their people without waiting for AU approval, it begs a chilling question: has the African Union become a bystander in Africa's struggle for survival? If it cannot act in the face of bloodshed, if it cannot shield its own from chaos, and if it cannot back the few brave leaders trying to hold the line, then its very purpose is under trial, and the verdict may be delivered by a new generation. With Traoré's emotional speech still echoing across the continent and the African Union's silence deafening in the face of crisis, Africa now stands at a decisive crossroads. This is no longer about one frustrated leader or one broken institution. This is about the future architecture of African power itself. What fills the void when the house that was meant to protect us begins to crumble? There are now three competing visions rising out of this moment, each pulling the continent in a different direction: reform from within, replacement from outside, or a total revolution of the African political order. Some believe the AU's crisis is not terminal, it's structural. From this viewpoint, the solution lies in deep, urgent reform. Strip away its bureaucratic layers. Cut its dependency on foreign donors. Empower regional security councils with teeth. Shift from ceremonial summits to rapid, practical interventions. In short, make the AU fit for 21st century Africa. This would mean establishing an African emergency response force that can deploy within days, not years. It would mean decentralizing power so local bodies can act without waiting for Addis Abeba's approval. It would require elevating the AU's Pan-African Parliament from a symbolic space to a legislative force with binding powers. But the question remains: who inside the AU has the courage, or even the will, to undertake this transformation? The same leadership that allowed this decay may not be the ones to fix it. Reform is ideal. But is it still realistic? If reform fails or stalls indefinitely, Africa may see the emergence of entirely new continental alliances. And in some ways, it's already happening. The Alliance of Sahel States, (EAS), formed by Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, is more than a security pact. It's becoming a prototype for what an alternative Pan-African structure might look like. One that doesn't answer to foreign donors. One that resists neo-colonial interference. And one that prioritizes African defense, development, and dignity on its own terms. There is growing talk among Pan-African thinkers of expanding this into a broader African Sovereignty Council, an entity that would unite revolutionary governments, grassroots movements, independent intellectuals, and strategic partners like Russia, China, Turkey, or Brazil. Such a bloc could coordinate trade, energy, and military cooperation without the red tape of the AU or the moral policing of ECOWAS. It's a bold vision, but also a dangerous one, Because parallel structures can mean parallel legitimacy. And if competing power centers rise, they may fragment the continent even further unless carefully guided. Then there's the radical path, the one hinted at by Traoré's tearful declaration. This is not about improving a broken system or creating a new one. It's about resetting the very foundation of African unity. A revolution that goes beyond institutional frameworks and aims to rebuild the soul of Africa from the ground up. In this vision, unity isn't imposed from Addis Ababa. It's built through people-to-people alliances across youth movements, peasant cooperatives, digital entrepreneurs, freedom fighters, artists, and communities resisting extraction. It's not a conference room. It's a battlefield, a classroom, a farm, a radio station. This revolution wouldn't wear suits. It would wear overalls. It wouldn't ask for resolutions. It would plant seeds, defend borders, build homes, write new curricula, and tell new stories. The goal isn't just sovereignty, it's a new consciousness. And in many ways, we're already seeing glimpses of it. When Traoré stands before a crowd and speaks not in diplomatic phrases, but in fire and truth, he's not addressing the AU. He's addressing the next generation, the one that's tired of pretending broken systems can be repaired. So, the question isn't just what Africa should do with the AU. It's what Africa wants to become without it. Will the continent continue waiting for an institution that no longer serves its needs? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and rooted in African truth, subscribe to Africa Unchained. Until next time, stay tuned.